Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got an awesome guest on today. He's a UK-based designer specializing in branding, graphic and web design, illustration, and photography. He has a worldwide client roster, and his work is often featured in design-related publications. He's also a regular speaker at design and tech conferences. Please join me in welcoming Mike Kus. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Any questions before we start?
No, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, in terms of my job and my combination, um, a designer, all different aspects of that. I do illustration, web design, icon design, branding, and from project to project, sort of, combine those different aspects of design and creativity, depending what the challenge is. I also do some photography, and publish that via Instagram. And so basically generally being sort of a branding, creative, web designer, photographer kind of thing, all mixed together.
Great, yeah. Just to know for our audience, Mike and I don't know each other until now, but I reached out to him, seeing his kind of footprint in the UK and what he's doing there, and was excited to reach out. So number two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
I guess I don't know if it makes me different, but I think over the years I've learned not to try and design my future too much. And maybe that's because you see a lot online, don't you, with people talking about the future and how to build their future. And I there are a lot of things that I do to try and facilitate that myself. And that's something else, I know it's going to come up in your questions later on, which I sort of have a story related to that. But at the same time, I'm sort of learned over time not to fixate about that. And I don't know if that's against the grain of everyone else, but I've sort of found that there's a balance to be had between sort of trying to create a future you want and also not getting so fixated on it that it almost becomes a burden, And so I don't know if that makes me different from everyone else, but it's a piece of sort of learning that's happened to me in the last 15, 20 years that I feel is now at this point in my career is actually, I'm finding it quite important to strike that balance. And so going forward, I always trying to have a sort of a balance between, designing a future, but also seeing how things pan out as well and not stressing out about it too much.
Nice. Yeah, glad to hear you bring up the future. One of our early guests, Dr. Marco Bevlo, had an episode that was specifically around design futures. So definitely check that out, you guys. So number three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
I think I was always destined to do what I do in some capacity. I've just, from my earliest memories, some of my earliest memories, I used to design, like trainers like for Nike and Adidas just for fun, and used to have draw, just with pens and pencils, and then send them off, hoping they might use my designs. And at school, I always enjoyed art, but the funny thing is about my art was it was always sort of laced with a bit of graphic design, So I remember for my at school for my sort of GCSE project, which in the UK is sort of that's what you do when you finish school.
Mm.
Um, you, I part of mine was I did sort of like I did do some art, sort of more traditional art, but I also did a fictitious windsurfing brand which I was into at the time,
Mm.
and it was just for me there was always, I don't know what it is. I think it may be partly to do with typography, partly to do with I don't know, this sort of the sense of balance you get from graphic design. But combining the two was always something I was interested in from a super early age. And even went on to university doing fine art. Even my painting in fine art had a sort of a graphic design element to it. And so it was always going to be an amalgamation of all these things. And it's funny, in a way, my job now, working for myself, my job is very much an amalgamation of different parts of the creative industry. So whereas some people specialize in one aspect of it, like I do illustration, I do photography, I do web design, and I jump from one to the other and use each of those disciplines, in mix them up. And it's so I'm sort of still doing the same thing today that I was doing when I was 8 years old, really.
Nice. Great. Okay, so number 4, some people struggle with, and you brought this up a little bit earlier, but the question is, what does your future look like?
Yeah. So I think I don't know what it looks like, but like I said, that balance I was talking about earlier on, I don't know what it looks like, but I understand at the same time that I need to sort of, you obviously, as a designer or a creative, whatever you do, you have a chance to design your future a little bit. And there's a sort of a story I was going to tell you for another question later on, but basically, it was one of the great things that happened to me was getting into the web design part of graphic design, because it opened up a whole new an entire new kind of area of design for me, designing online. And so I guess, whilst I don't know exactly what the future brings, I know that I can influence that by what I decide to learn, the kinds of projects I take on. And I work on numerous different kinds of projects. I get asked to do a lot of different kinds. I don't take everything on. So in a funny way, by choosing the work that I feel would benefit my future and benefit my mind, and doing work that I feel like I can bring something to, and you are sort of shaping it by choosing those projects, and I don't really know where that will take me, but I make this daily basis that I feel will be the best choice for the future, if you know what I mean.
Great. Yeah. So number 5, we say, is unique to this podcast. And the question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Yeah. I mean, location is sort of, yeah, it's a weird one. I've got a story for this, because location has been a big thing in my life. In a way, I've thought about location a lot. I've done when I used to, the story is basically, I used to think it was super important. Now I'm not so sure how important it is. And the reason is um I moved away from where I live now for a job a few years ago that I really enjoyed and had an amazing time. And that's for a company called Personified over in the city of Bath in the UK. It's a beautiful city. It's got a great we had a really young family at the time. It's a great place for bringing up kids, because it's got enough to do for an adult, but it's also a great environment for children. And we then moved away from there, and I never really felt right. I didn't feel, I wasn't, I didn't, it didn't really sit well with me. I moved away for a few years, and then we decided to move back, and that move back didn't work out. And it was because the place, it wasn't really about the place. What I was yearning for wasn't really the location. It was sort of a time point in my life, in a way. And what was weird was we basically, it was a expensive decision, but we reversed it all. Just literally reversed it all. We'd moved kids out of schools, then we moved them out of schools again to go back to where we are now. And the whole thing was a massively big, expensive experiment. But the funny thing, lots of people are friends, it's something we laugh about now. But the weird thing is, I don't know, it sort of taught me that actual physical location wasn't what was important to me. It was more of a sense of learning to have it was more of a state of mind and a sense of feeling like you're in the right location. And I think what I discovered is that feeling like you're in the right location isn't necessarily about the physical location. It's about how you feel. And that could be a combination of because of the people you're with, and probably largely due to that, actually. And the kind of lifestyle you have combined with the people around you. And whilst it was an expensive experiment, the whole thing, the great thing was a huge payoff in my state of mind, because I realized I felt hugely in the right place after that. And I was back at the beginning, ironically, but I felt I'd never felt so comfortable in and have a sense of belonging, a sense of place. And so the whole thing was worth it, if you know what I mean. Even though it cost a lot financially, it ended up being worth it for that reason. Because I don't know if we had never done it and never taken a chance, I might still be having these conversations about location right now, And for the last 5 years, 6 years since that happened, I've never once questioned my location.
Great. And maybe that segues nicely into number 6, which is if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Well, yeah, I guess I could say, but like don't worry too much about location. But I don't know. I think the thing about that sort of thing is it's all part of growing up, isn't it? So, as a human being and going through life and learning things, and you sort of have to learn that for yourself. And in a way, you have to learn everything for yourself. And you can't just be told. It's like people were telling me. This is the funny thing about advice like that. I mean, people thought we were mad for moving away again, and maybe they were right. But the funny thing is that it didn't. And in a funny way, I knew. It was part of my brain that knew it was maybe not the right thing to do. But sometimes you just got to. Sometimes you have to have the experience in order to learn. It might look like a simple piece of sort of critical thinking on paper when you add things up, but sometimes you just need to experience it to learn how you really feel about it. But one of the other one of the other things I think I would go back and tell myself, which is the sort of flip side of the balancing thing and not designing your future, is that I do think you should, there is in sort of the other side of that is partly designing your future. And I was only like in my early 30s. I'm in my late 40s now, but I was in my early 30s when I really, did that break into web design, and it opened up a whole new world of design for me. And I guess, I don't know, but maybe I was young and naive, but I felt like maybe I let things happen to me rather than I, made things happen. And I think I would go back and tell my sort of early 20 something self that, that there is an aspect of designing your future as well as letting it happen, and I think I would go back and say that to myself if I could. But like I say, as I've gotten older, I've also realized that, there's something about, there's a sort of a balance to be struck there. You can't just all be about like designing everything that happens to you. There's something nice about experiencing life and in your career and your family and, seeing how things go. And so, yeah. And, that's where I'm at right now, for that balance.
Great. Okay. And number 7, what's a day in your life like?
It's a mix between family stuff and, work design, branding, web design. So, I've got 3 kids. I take the youngest to school still. and sometimes pick them up from school if my wife's not, if she's working. And then I share, I've got a sort of a colleague, Ollie, who I share an office with. He does the same as me, basically, different style, but we both do the same kind of thing. And I go to my office, work in a range of branding and design projects, do some photography, just to sort of mainly, my photography is more hobby now, but I still try and fit that into my schedule. And then coming back home again, it's sort of like back into the family life stuff, and yeah, and then and I also try and fit in a bit of music. Sometimes I do I make some music and do that sort of for a hobby and try and fit that in this spare few minutes I might have each day. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty standard stuff, sort of balancing work with family life.
Perfect. So 8 is around lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, for me, it's like I'm sort of like I've got a love-hate relationship with that because everyone talks about, like, you're right, it's a really popular topic and everyone's talking about bettering themselves all the time. And I've always actually been a little bit of like a sort of phobic of learning. It's not something I feel very comfortable with. And but having said that, when like I said to you earlier, learning web design and learning how to code, that front end code, was such a liberating and freeing experience. And, it was an amazing leap for me to do that. So I understand what learning brings. But at the same time, I find it difficult, not difficult to learn necessarily, but sort of, yeah, I've got like I'm a bit scared of learning, for some reason. But in recent years, I've sort of made a pact with myself just to sort of like not be afraid of diving into things and just giving it a go, doing tutorials and yes, I do YouTube tutorials and learn how to use new bits of software, or how to use my software I use in a better way, and just I read blogs, try to keep up with what's going on in the design world, who's using what to make what. But at the end of the day as well, I'm not hung up on it because, I think what I do especially, whilst I need my tools, it's the creative part for me that's the most important. So I can normally, find my way to the end point, with what I know. And I think I'm glad I'm more, I mean, I'd say my strengths are creativity, rather than technical skills.
Mhm.
And I'm sort of happy it's that way around, to be honest.
Great. And 9, tools. What tools do you use? Are you both digital and analog?
Yeah. I mean, I use the standard sort of Adobe tools, to do sort of illustration and photography stuff, like, Illustrator, Photoshop, Lightroom. And I've been using XD for web design up until now, but I think it's maybe getting phased out now. But and I'll probably move to Figma. But yeah, but they're the sort of tools I use for my work. I'm not a I'm not sort of wedded to those. I do, but my illustration stuff, I still largely do it by hand, and I'll scan things in and edit it in software. But when I'm drawing, I use like inks and pencils and things like that, and to create my illustrative stuff, I pretty much do all of that offline. I mean, I've never really, because I have played with Procreate,
Mm.
but I still largely do all my illustration on paper. And if I need to get into the computer, I just photograph it and then start working on it at that point. But I'm still a bit more for the freehandy, more free stuff. I'm still more old school on that front.
Great. Okay. And halfway, number 10, work-life balance. How do you deal with it?
Um, like I said, we're going really to sort of going back to that sort of day in a life thing. I mean, in a way, it's like lots of people who have families, it's sort of dictated to you by that. So like I said to you about the whole school run thing, doing stuff with the kids, and just running a family with my partner, that sort of really sort of dictates the work-life balance. You don't really have to work too hard in it. The only thing I am guilty of, obviously, is like I do work in the evenings sometimes, and that's just sometimes it has to be done because things come up, like I'm picking people up and dropping people off everywhere all the time. So working in the evening is something that sometimes just has to be done. But it's because it's because I work for myself. I have the freedom to be able to do these things. So it's just sort of it's just making it work around everything else that's going on, and it works really well, to be honest.
Nice. And Levin, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Um, I really don't know. I've got no idea. I really don't know. But if I was, if I suddenly, I think I'd do a lot of music. Something I really like doing that I don't do enough of in my own opinion. There's something about music for me that, in creating all right songs and stuff, that I find very, very satisfying.
Mm.
There's something about music I feel like I've always felt there's something about music that's more powerful in a way than visuals for me. Because the way you can listen to a song. I mean, I love looking at different bits of design and stuff
Mm.
in graphic design, illustration, but if music, it can completely transport you to, you get goosebumps and you can go off into a different place completely. And I feel like, to me, there's something, I don't know what that is, but it's extremely powerful. And
Mm.
when you do it yourself and you feel like you've managed to create something semi-interesting, it's a pretty satisfying experience and quite an emotional experience. And I like that. I'm sort of interested in nostalgia and stuff, and I don't know, the feeling of nostalgic memories, and music sort of plays into that a bit. So, but yeah, so if I wasn't a designer, I like the idea of being a full-time musician.
Mm. And what would you not like to do with your career?
Um, I don't know. I think all the projects I'm currently working on, I really like, and I sort of, I think what I'm happy about is that I get to work with a lot of really nice companies, nice people on projects that I'm really um into. I mean, working on a daily basis with people I really like working with. I think what I would hate is if for some reason I was doing what I loved, but I didn't like the kind of projects I was working on, And I know that's possible because from doing, from going right back to the very beginning when I was doing sort of freelance stuff, and I used to do sort of freelance stuff and I used to do adverts for magazines for local companies, and they'd pay me like £20 or something. I felt like I was completely, I don't know, and I was doing it for stuff I wasn't interested in, and and it took, if I'd never managed to find my way to the part of the design world that I really loved, I think that would have been sad because, I love doing design a lot. And I'm just sort of grateful that I enjoy the work and projects that I do. I would have hated for that to become something that I didn't like.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Um, I, I don't actually.
Okay.
It's not something that springs to mind.
And no
I mean,
least.
well, yeah, funny. I mean, I guess the one thing that sort of, I mean, like going back to how we were talking about, I think this is one of the things that, when you go through your career, is in whatever you do, you do ask those questions about, have I made the right choices? Have I taken the right paths? And with social media constantly sort of yelling at you about how to improve yourself, and how to make, which is obviously, at first glance, it's a positive message, but I think sometimes, constantly reading on Twitter about how to be better and reading about what it says and thinking, yeah, mate, and then especially when you read things you haven't done, it sort of feels a bit of a negative. It sounds negative to me, I view that what's supposed to be a positive inspiration to the reader can make you feel negative because you're maybe not doing what they're suggesting, So, and I haven't got a specific thing that comes to mind, but I think the sort of over promotion of having to be a better person all the time on social media frustrates me.
Mm. And if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what word might you choose?
Simple.
Mm. What keeps you up at night?
I don't know, pretty any just stupid stuff, like it's completely unrelated to anything important, like like I remember I was joking with someone about this the other day, actually. And I was just like, look, went to bed, I've not even got any need for this. And I'm lying there about to go to sleep. And I'm like, shit, where's my passport? Where did I put my passport? Did I put it back after my last trip? And I'm lying there thinking, oh no, I've lost my passport. And it's just completely unrelated to anything. I'm not going anywhere in a hurry. I've got no trips booked, but for some reason, this detail of my life, it's suddenly come into my head, is haunting me and stopping me from going to sleep to the point that I've got to get up and look for it. Think things like that really just sort of, and yeah, just sort of weird thoughts that creep into your head just before you go to sleep.
Final stretch. What's the dream you were chasing?
Um, what sort of dream am I chasing? I think again, I'm just gonna have to go back to the sort of I for the last 10 years, I've put various goals on a list and probably never achieved any of them, but achieved other things, So I recently wrote a book, photography book, which is a nice thing to do, but it was never on my list of things to do. So um I feel like I said to you, I feel like I sort of, I'm more of a short term. When I say short term, I'm more of like a, like thinking of the next few months rather than what I'm going to achieve or do in the next numerous amount of years. Because I always write goals down and end up, achieving something else that's not on the list, So yeah, I just keep trying to do my best and, know that if I do that, something interesting will happen.
What inspires you?
Um, I get if I'm doing design work, in a very practical level, I just look around the web and just see what people are making, and I follow tons of artists on Instagram. Like, I mean, I think what's interesting is that all my stuff is inspired, like visually, I'm inspired by art, a lot of art, like painting, um, graphic stuff, all kinds of different art. They're not really related to working in branding and web, but just they're just an onslaught of colors and interesting compositions and things. But I often, in terms, it sounds really cliche, but I often get my ideas and creativity like when I'm in the shower or something. It's something about, I don't know what it is about, and sometimes when I'm cycling or running or something like that. I think when I'm doing an activity, I mean, I don't know the science behind this, but I'm sure someone must know the science, because as soon as I go into a kind of do an activity that's repetitive, my brain goes into a certain place, and suddenly I just have loads of ideas. I'll be thinking about a current project and cycling back from my office, and suddenly all my ideas will come when I'm cycling on the road, or if I'm in the shower in the morning. I'll just, and it's not like I don't go in thinking I'm going to think of ideas. It just happens in those moments, and yeah, like I say, I don't know what the science is there, but I'm sure there must be some kind of. I'm sure if I look it up, there'll be a reason for that. But yeah, that's how things come to me.
Nice. And any advice you'd like to share
What related to that or anything?
in general?
Um, I'd say like, yeah, I think like have goals, but don't necessarily, have goals and try and, make an effort to design your future and don't be afraid of learning new things. Um, but also don't stress if the path you end up going down is slightly different to what you imagined, and the element of surprise can quite often be pretty exciting. But as long as you're making sort of you putting, I think as long as you're putting effort in the short term and trying to do your best and make good decisions, if you do that, you will probably end up doing something you're enjoying and something that's rewarding.
Great. And 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What should we follow about you?
Yeah, you can keep tabs on me on Twitter at Mike Kus and the same username on Instagram.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on today. It's such a kind of privilege to be able to connect Canada and the UK in this way, and for me to stumble
Yeah.
on it was a real blessing, I think. So, thank you so much.
No, thanks so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Thanks.